for years and years and years, the Americans would throw us at our face constantly the years of Krishna Menon for having contributed to the gross misunderstandings between India and the United States. The United States has been self-serving in these arguments. They couldn't stand his lip and his harangues and his anti-American posture and his long defensive debates on the Kashmir issue in the United Nations and targeting the Americans.
Nehru's time had so many other issues. I mean, of course, we can talk about Kashmir, but did we have even food back then?
You know, if we had fought the British, like the Algerians fought the French, we had a violent struggle for independence, we wouldn't have been in the Commonwealth. But since we negotiated our independence, and the person with whom it was negotiated was the last Viceroy of India, we made the last Viceroy of India the first Governor General of India. Now, once you make him the Governor General of India and a close relation of the British royal family,
it's a great experience to be here in Srinagar after quite a few years. So thanks to Srikula Foundation for organizing this fantastic LitFest. Now, this session is a very interesting topic, you know, foreign policy. We all love to talk about foreign policy as if all of us are experts. We pass on expert comments, but very few of us understand. Now, we are lucky to have two people on the stage. At least I am lucky to have two people with me. One who has practiced foreign policy, shaped it, and who has very closely observed it. So they are in very good place to tell us more about it, the inside stories, what actually goes on, to make us more informed citizens. We are laypersons, so we need to understand a bit more, and I don't think we could have better persons with us to explain things to us. Now, Kallol, I was reading your book. It's a very nice book, and I would request all of you to pick up a copy, whoever is interested in foreign policy. It's a very, very interesting book. It's not a lecture. It's not an academic treatise. It's written more in anecdotal and storytelling style, and you will like reading if you want to understand India's position vis-a-vis the wider world. So I was reading your book, and one thing that I really liked is that the way you open it, that you were a kid and you were living India's foreign policy in Agartala. And that was 1971, the Indo-Bangladesh, Indo-Pak War.
I grew up in the 80s, but of course 71 was part of my growing up.
Okay. Yeah. But you have seen that phase, you have seen the tanks and everything pass by. And then it struck me, sir, you had joined the services in 1966, if I'm not wrong. So just a few years before that. So while you were a young professional, a young diplomat, shaping, influencing, and practicing the foreign policy, he was, you know, another part of the country living it. So, I mean, basically, and now, sir, you retired as the foreign secretary, and traveling from there till the head to the pinnacle of the institution. And you have developed as a journalist, grown as a journalist, and interacted with a host of interesting individuals within the institution and outside who were involved. So my first question is a very general and broad one to both of you. I would start with you because we are discussing your book. How have you seen things change from the 1970s, or if you say 1980s, to where we are now? I mean, what are the key changes that you have seen? You have lived through it, you have studied it, and you have been writing about it. What has changed?
Thank you so much. It's really an honor and a privilege. I must tell you that the Kashmir Literary Festival is the first festival that Nehru's first recruits is traveling to. We are planning to take the book to many other literary festivals in the coming months, and I'm really deeply grateful to Srikula Foundation and Yuvraj and many other colleagues and supporters and well-wishers for making this possible. Coming back to the question that you asked, I would say that you know, when we were growing up in the 80s, foreign policy perhaps was more structured. Foreign policy initiatives and the execution was left more to the professionals, who is, you know, one of the most important ones is actually sitting here. today foreign policy is shaped by many, many people. It's shaped by you, me, everyone, and people in general have a lot of interest in foreign policy issues, debates, disputes. So I would say that today foreign policy is far more informal. It has got the formal structure. We do need the diplomats, the officials, especially the bureaucracy, to conduct the main negotiations and the main official channel level discussions. But then people in general also have a great role to play, and that must not be forgotten. And you mentioned that I have written Nehru's first recruits in an anecdotal way, and really thank you so much for that kind appreciation. And what I want to say is that when I was writing, I was thinking that in course of my book research, I had a trusted taxi driver who always had opinions about America or Canada or any other place, and we would be discussing, and he was one of the first persons who would tell me that what is happening in Punjab, what the farmers are doing, etc. So people are in general very aware of everything. And I'm here in Kashmir, in Srinagar, and I don't have to tell you people that how important the Kashmiri people are to India's foreign policy. So the reason that I wrote in an anecdotal way is because foreign policy, it belongs to now more than ever before to everyone, not just in India but also in other parts of the world. If you are a farmer today, and if the government of India is entering in an agreement with, say, for example, the United Arab Emirates, then you should be curious that why is my government entering into an agreement with Emirates? If you are a medical professional, if the government of India opens up medical tourism opportunities for your hospitals, then you should be interested how you can take benefits out of it. So, foreign policy today and foreign policy initiatives are more informal compared to what it was in the 60s and 70s. And also in the 80s. Today it's far more informal, far more, I would say, confederated. It's far more spread out. It's got many more stakeholders. But I always argue, because as a reporter, I feel every profession must have some discipline, and that discipline comes if we safeguard the core, that is the formal institution. After the formal institution is safeguarded, we can always open it up for larger participation and larger discussion at the societal level. But I am someone who believes that the foreign policy professionals must be listened to first. They should be consulted first. And after we have taken the official version, then we can move ahead and throw it out for a broader consultation and participation. So that's today a more informal field of interaction. That's to my knowledge and understanding.
You made a couple of very interesting observations. You almost indicated a democratization of foreign policy making. Becoming informal, and you are suggesting that these are kind of matters which should be left to professionals, experienced people like him. It raises a curious question, sir, which you would be in a better position to answer. So when we look at Nehru's recruits deals with the first batch of the first recruits of the IFS properly recruited into the service. But before that started, our first ambassador to the US was Asaf Ali. Then there were people like Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, then Krishna Menon, none of whom were trained and officially, who could be called diplomats. Similarly, there were people who were taken from Netaji's Azadin government who were not trained diplomats. So, we could see Jawaharlal Nehru reaching out to people and deploying people who were not diplomats in that true sense before starting the service. So, are we going back full circle, or, do you agree with his observation?
Well, at that time, the Indian Foreign Service had not been constituted. It was constituted in 1947. And if you had to constitute a proper diplomatic service with experienced people at the ambassadorial level, then you couldn't have the raw recruits who just joined the service to fulfill that role. So you had to then, therefore, look at people who you think had the intellectual ability, the social ease, the diplomatic finesse, experience in negotiations, and who had good rapport with Nehru himself and the political class. And therefore he chose people from various walks of life. There were people from the armed services. My first ambassador in Paris was C.S. Jha. He was a lot of ICS people came in, and then he was succeeded by D.N. Chatterjee, who was from the army. You had the Maharaja of Patiala, you had the Maharaja of Jaipur. There was other people from states, from our states who had been Rajas or who were aristocrats. Narendra Singh Sarila, who was ambassador in France, was also from the same stock. So it was quite natural that he would choose people, apart from the ICS, who had a lot of experience in administration, people from other walks of life, to have a cadre which could represent our diplomatic interests abroad. Now, with regard to Vijay Lakshmi Pandit or Krishna Menon or Asif Ali and others, frankly, look at the United States. Most of the ambassadors are political appointees. They don't have any experience in diplomacy. And yet they are propelled into very, very important missions, U.S. missions abroad. And U.S. has huge diplomatic and security interests all over the world. But they don't mind a system in which they can have people with no proper diplomatic experience to head the mission. So that was not unusual at that time. What I mean is that we have discontinued that because we've now properly selected through competitive exam an Indian Foreign Service. The Americans have a foreign service also, but they believe in political appointees. Some of our key ambassadorial positions at that time were held by the ICS, whether in Beijing, for example, or T.N. Call, who played a very important role in our diplomatic service for many, many years, ambassador to USA and to Russia, apart from being Foreign Secretary. Keval Singh, who was also Foreign Secretary. R.D. Sathe, who was from the Navy, Indian Navy. He was also Foreign Secretary. Jagat Mehta, he was also from the Navy. He also became Foreign Secretary. But from 47 onwards, when we had direct recruits, and as they grew up, they reached apart from manning our missions abroad and our critical divisions, we have, of all the list of foreign secretaries, most of them now, if you look at it, are from the service itself. But let me say a couple of things. That some of the biggest mistakes we made in foreign policy also happened during Nehru's time. And it happened at a time when the key people involved were not from the Indian Foreign Service as such, but had been inducted into the Foreign Service from outside.
Could you give us an example?
No, the whole thing with, begin with Krishna Menon. For years, and I'm on Krishna Menon's side, but nevertheless, for years and years and years, the Americans would throw us at our face constantly the years of Krishna Menon for having contributed to the gross misunderstandings between India and the United States. The United States has been self-serving in these arguments. They couldn't stand his lip and his harangues and his anti-American posture and his long defensive debates on the Kashmir issue in the United Nations and targeting the Americans. But the whole manner in which the Kashmir issue was taken to the United Nations, and that legacy we are living until now. China, I mean, in 1954, we just handed over Tibet to China. We had no geopolitical sense. Although, mind you, people like Sardar Patel were cautioning that once China becomes your neighbor, you will have endless problems. It will be a grave security threat to you. But Nehru had his own vision about Afro-Asian solidarity, India-China bye-bye and stuff like that. And we just handed over Tibet to China without any advantages that we could extract from that. The most important being a clear understanding on the border. These are the two most vital examples where these mistakes in our foreign policy have continued to haunt us till today. But coming back to what you said about foreign policy and its democratization and this and that. First is the ambit of foreign policy has expanded so widely that you cannot have expertise in all those areas in the Indian diplomatic service. Because then you have to have people who come into the service from all kinds of backgrounds, and especially technocrats and expertise in who have expertise in certain subjects, climate change, environment, or what have you. And since, because the globalization and multilateralism and integration of so many issues at the international level, cross-cutting issues, you have to have domain experts who will then look at these issues in depth and take the field and participate in negotiation. Look at the climate change COP29. The person leading it is somebody from our environment ministry. It's not from the Indian Foreign Service. And you can't, and then there's the rules of business. You can't say that, look, get rid of the Commerce Ministry, get rid of the Environment Ministry, get rid of this and that, and everything should be under the umbrella of the External Affairs Ministry. Can't happen. Can't happen. So that is one part of why other experts and other fields intrude into foreign policy making, which is outside the expert domain of the Indian Foreign Service. The other is social media. Now, the manner in which our External Affairs Minister is constantly on the social media, is lecturing everywhere. Apart from Twitter, any meeting held anywhere of industrialists or what have you, think tanks, he's there talking about our foreign policy. In fact, in a sense, popularizing the interest in foreign policy, doing precisely what you said, that we understand that even if people don't yet have sufficient stakes in India's foreign policy, they should develop those stakes. And that was the thought behind the G20. Why did the Prime Minister take the 53 meetings, God knows how many locations, all over the country? The whole idea was that people should feel that, or rather they should understand the various dimensions of Indian foreign policy and how they have interest in it, and therefore get a wider public support for India's foreign policy decisions. And then, of course, the media and the social media are today, with the news traveling from all over and a lot of countries interfering in our internal affairs and this and that, they have to respond very quickly to what is happening on the ground. That may give the impression that the foreign policy is being made, in inverted commas, by these lobbies outside the External Affairs Ministry. It's not quite that. It's just that there is much more need for explanation. That is the prime need. And in some cases, yes, where, for example, Indian students or others, they are stranded in countries and this and that, there's a lot of pressure on the Ministry of External Affairs that they must actually extract them, and very rapidly, before it becomes a very difficult public relations issue. So it is something which is in national interest and which is a duty, but is also forced upon them, because they never ask these people to go into these areas and start working there and this and that and that. But once they go there, they are earning good money, and when they are in trouble, they think it is Government of India's or Ministry of External Affairs bounden duty to extract them, and government has to do it for right reasons. But point is that they are compelled to do this because those decisions are forced upon them by situations in which our Indians get caught, and then they have certain expectations from the government. But if you look at, there's one thing I've learned as Foreign Secretary, that when I used to read the press, I used to ask myself, where the hell are they? Why the hell are they saying this? Where have they got this information from? It's totally wrong. This is not at all what our thinking and policy is. That also is there. A lot of that is prodded by external interests, and, they plant these things and this and that. So this is what the reality is.
That's and your comment on a very, very interesting note, and that brings me right back to you, Kallol. You have mentioned, I'm going to pick up on that. You have mentioned at one place in your book that as a journalist, it is your duty to find there are gaps in the stories of the foreign ministry, and it is your duty to bring the true story. So what is the conflict? What sir said that when he reads stories by journalists, not essentially you, but journalists, and he wonders where have they got the information from. So he has some kind of curiosity as to what is going on. You have, as a journalist, a whole lot of questions, much of which might remain unanswered, but then you feel it is your duty to dig out the truth and bring it to the public. So there is clearly somewhere an overlap, a conflict. Conflict might be a strong word, but they don't match each other. So what is your concept of this gap in official stories, and how do you feel that, and how do you respond to sir's comment?
Well, I wouldn't call it conflict. I would call it discursive mismatch. Perhaps there are discourses that the Foreign Ministry, External Affairs Ministry wants. I would say that, as a spokesperson, as the government, you have your own discourse that you would give it to the people. But as the recipient of that information, it's my task to scan it, to get to as I said, the gaps in the narrative, so that we can sort of reconfigure the whole picture from the point of view of a news reader. So that's a different exercise. One has to go to the professional shoes that I'm wearing while I'm attending a press conference and asking a question to the spokesperson. So it's not necessarily a conflict. I would say these are the mismatches that we meet on an everyday basis. That's my way of dealing with the issue that you just raised. But coming back to the point that sir mentioned, that today the government has to evacuate people if they are stuck in different countries and locations. I would say that we have to really go back in time and remember that this is a tradition, sir, and obviously you remember it very well as well yourself, that goes back to the 1940s, even 1930s. Indians in Africa, when they were caught, the Nehru government had to intervene and do something about them, though we could not do much about them. When Indians were caught in Southeast Asia because they had fought with the Japanese and they were prisoners of the Japanese, they had to be evacuated by ships. Indians had to be Tamilians had to be saved, rather brought to Tamil Nadu. So that's a long history of these sort of evacuations that the government of India has done in the past, has been doing in the past, and ever since has been doing. Because if you go back even to Uganda in the 1970s, I'm sure all of you remember infamous Idi Amin's expulsion of Indians from Uganda, and then how they were scattered across the world. This is an exercise that has been going on, and that's why my book I make the point that this is a tradition that begins with the independence of India, where Indian people, as part of a post-colonial society, asserted their right to safeguard the interests of their diaspora wherever they are. So there are many things that continue from the Nehruvian period till now. Sir, you mentioned, of course, that the blunders of the Nehru period, and I'm sure that you have absolute solid reasons for that. I'm not going to counter it, because I don't have that metal to counter you right here. But I would say something that Nehru's time had so many other issues. I mean, of course, we can talk about Kashmir, but did we have even food back then? We didn't even have food back then. I mean, the general who was speaking here before talked about the difficulties that India was faced with in 1947 and how the whole world was waiting for India to fail. The fact is, India got independence, but India didn't know where food was going to come from 1 month after India got independence. Of course, Kashmir is an issue that goes back to 47 and 48. Of course, Kashmir issue has been there, but also the issues of food and such basic issues had to be dealt with as well. And I think all of those issues as well were part of diplomacy. So the basket of diplomacy, and as we also mentioned that, it was to begin with an informal structure which became formal. And now once again, we are going back to this kind of greater democratization of the foreign policy structure. The basket of diplomacy, even back then, was very, very broad and very complicated.
I mean, he mentioned some things which I will bring that question to you, adding one more question for my own understanding is, you very rightly said that, I mean, food and basic necessities were the critical issues at that time when we got independence. And at that time, so do you think that India was particularly under Jawaharlal Nehru, that we had developed some kind of a savior complex, that India, despite not being able to manage the domestic affairs, was taking a very aggressive stand on anti-imperialism, ending imperialism in the world, bringing world peace. I mean, taking a socialistic attitude, which might or might not have been right. I'm not questioning that. But taking a very aggressive stand towards the US, towards the USSR, the non-aligned stand, yet taking a complete U-turn from the previous position of the Indian National Congress of complete independence, which meant completely dissociating from the Commonwealth, joining the Commonwealth and talking about non-aligned movement, talking about anti-imperialism, talking about world peace. Was India getting too much involved in the global affairs than required?
Well, in a sense, it was inevitable because we were the first major country that became independent. And that was the beginning of the unraveling of the British Empire. So we were cast into a position where we had to lead the decolonization process. Number two, once you have struggled against British imperialism and colonialism and got your independence, it is impossible to conceive that you will again sit in their lap and say, you look after us. You have to take an independent position. And the way to safeguard your longer-term interests and promote this anti-colonialism was to actually join hands with the newly emerging independent countries, which then slowly was the became the foundation of the non-aligned movement with Kwame Nkrumah, Ghana, and Indonesia.
Wasn't that antithetical to joining the Commonwealth?
No, I just come to that. And later on, Yugoslavia, because we needed also a country that is uncomfortable with the Soviet bloc. And Tito fulfilled that role. And of course, Egypt, Nasser. So they try to therefore play a role on the international stage. And then you go back to Nehru's vision of Afro-Asian solidarity, Asian Relations Conference and everything else. And his vision that if India and China work together, then they can decide the future of Asia and oust the imperial powers from the whole of Asia. These were the kind of grand visions he had. Now, his membership of the Commonwealth, I think, was because, if he had fought the British, like the Algerians fought the French, we had a violent struggle for independence, we wouldn't have been in the Commonwealth. But since we negotiated our independence, and the person with whom it was negotiated was the last Viceroy of India, we made the last Viceroy of India the first Governor General of India. Now, once you make him the Governor General of India and a close relation of the British royal family, and then you say you want to quit the Commonwealth. So we made a compromise. We won't quit the Commonwealth, but we will join the Commonwealth as a republic. And we will not recognize the Queen of England as the head of state of India. Partly it was also because, don't forget, we had a Britisher who was chief of our Air Force. We had a Britisher who was the chief of our Navy. So, you had British playing a role in our country's defense. And therefore, there was also this feeling that in order to go through this phase when we would stand on our own feet and understand how to govern India better, we needed the experience of help, or not experience, but in some ways, the backing and assistance of Britain. And that could be best acceded to if we remained a member of the Commonwealth. If you ask me, I would have said that we shouldn't have been a member of the Commonwealth. And even if we initially thought it was a useful thing to do, it's high time that we quit the Commonwealth. But now quitting the Commonwealth may give you emotional satisfaction, but it doesn't bring you... we have moved ahead, we have a larger economy than Britain itself. So why do we have to worry about Britain? We don't, Britain can't patronize us anymore. And within the Commonwealth, you have a whole host of African countries and developing countries. Even countries that are never part of the British Empire have become members of the Commonwealth, like Rwanda. What has it got? Or Mozambique. What has it got to do with the British Empire? So this gives us a platform, an additional platform where, in addition to our Africa policy and Africa summits and all our interests in Africa, we have another platform on which we can relate to these countries. In the event that there are issues in which we get involved at the international level, we expect there will be countries which will then hopefully support our point of view on those issues. And on issues like terrorism and our relations with Pakistan, with China, we are having a challenge because China has penetrated these countries itself a great deal. But the whole idea was also to have a group of countries which would have a relationship with us, which will give us a higher international stature. And that consideration remains. But on this food thing, you're talking about this ship to mouth thing. That was in Lyndon Johnson's time. And I don't think that this particular reason was why we were constrained to deal with the West in the way we did by sacrificing or in fact allowing them to interfere in our sovereignty in the manner in which we did when we, on the advice of the British, and fell into the trap of taking it to the United Nations. And we don't need to go into the history where they changed the entire... From a complainant, we became a defendant. It cannot be anything worse in terms of handling of diplomacy in international organizations. And I remember the time when Harriman and Duncan Sands came here and virtually told us to hand over. I mean, we are sitting in Jammu and Kashmir. I don't want to talk about it, but the manner in which they were forcing our hand on Jammu and Kashmir. Now they talk about interfering in the sovereignty of others and interfering in the internal relations of others, but they've been doing it all this while. But for the anti-imperialism discourse, I have already answered your question. In a sense, the grievance of the Americans towards Krishna Menon is this, that his anti-imperial discourse and anti-US discourse in the United Nations had a great echo in American press, in American political circles. And Nehru had acquired a certain stature by that time already. And therefore they felt if India went in that direction more and more, their overall global interests would be hurt, especially in the struggle against the Soviet Union on communism, where they wanted to draw the rest of the developing countries under their wings. And they felt that if Nehru didn't play ball, then they'll have more difficulty. So these are some of the reasons why we had difficult relations with the United States.
That's, greatly informing, and thank you for the explanations and the information. So, Kallol, since you have dealt with the first recruits, the first batch of the IFAs, and you have discussed in quite some detail what was going on, what were the challenges, how they were, each character, how they were dealing with it, and after they moved out of the system, how they looked back, reminisced, and commented on what was going on at that time. So I am going to, ask you to explain brief from those years, the Nehruvian years, and now what you see. How do you think things have evolved? How the attitude? Because I certainly felt, sir, that, I might be blunt. I am able to be blunt because I'm a common lay citizen. I don't have any stake in this. So I genuinely felt that immediately after independence, India overplayed her hand in the global affairs, trying to achieve too much, do too much than was probably required, or she was able to. That's my understanding. Of course, you might disagree with that. But from there to now, where you said that things are probably getting informalized a bit too much, and things should be left more to the expert. But I'm not talking about the structure. I'm talking more about the orientation, the goal, the objective, the change in attitude. How do you see that?
Well, first of all, you said that if India was really getting into too much of foreign responsibilities, this is a criticism that's not new. This is a criticism that was thrown at Nehru in the 1950s. And he went to Sweden and he talked about it, that we are being asked that should we really play a role in Southeast Asia? Should we play a role in Korea? And as Sir was saying, that this was inevitable because you are the biggest country to become independent. In the history of colonization, India's independence followed by the independence of Indonesia were really landmarks. So you have to really go back in time and see history in the way that it existed back then. Because, looking back and talking about things is one thing, but, you really have to go back in time and see what was the Indian condition that as Sir said, you have become independent. Now, you must have free and, unencumbered access to markets. If Indonesia and Thailand and Burma could give you your products, then why should you go to European markets and source your products from there? So these were, practical issues that had to be dealt with. So look at it, you said that if we were really, going for too much at immediately in the late 40s, when the Vietnam crisis broke out, they needed a neutral arbitrator. Who became the chairperson for the Vietnam committees? The three commissions of Vietnam. Not the United States, not the UK, nor even France. It was the government of India that became the chairperson of those commissions.
Probably even in the Korean War.
Of course, no, I'm coming to that later. But then the issue is that why did we become the chairpersons? Because we were perceived as truly neutral. Of course, Nehru was asked, why are you getting involved everywhere? And Nehru said that, do we have an option? Because if we don't go there, these places will be taken up by the people who have just left our zone. And these are the colonial players. They were continuously looking for places to intervene in the existence of free India. Yeah, just as it happened in 1956 Suez War. So the point is, if you have a human resource pool, India didn't have a small population back then. India had a large number of professionals who could have played a role, and they were sort of recruited and brought into the Foreign Service to play these sort of roles, so that the people who left this region, the colonial players, could not find an opportunity to play that role once again. So that had to be stopped, So that tradition was stopped. Of course, we can talk about it in 2024. But at that time, just imagine the anti-colonial sentiment that existed in India. The reason the word sentiment is so powerful, because without the word sentiment, India would not have become free in 1947. Sentiment is very, very important. And remember, Nehru was also he was also an electoral politician. He had to win elections. So all these campaigns for, say, Goa and Pondicherry and etc., these are all timed accordingly. So there is also political consideration involved here, but I would always argue that, these are some things that we can always talk about, that was it okay to get involved in so many theaters at the same time, when at the same time we also had, problems of food and basic issues at home and industrialization. I would say that, perhaps those had to be done, just like today. We have so many problems today, but aren't we getting involved in so many places and asserting ourselves, because these are important in the long run in the interest of the Indian state. So this is not even for the government of India. It is important in the interest of the Indian state to take care of certain theatres, even if it comes at certain costs.
Would you like to comment, sir, on that?
No, Kallol has mentioned this food thing again, and that just reminded me about the culpability of Britain in the 1943 famine in Bengal, where 5 million people died. They destroyed our agriculture, and then, indigo plantations and this and that, and all the history everybody knows. So if India had a food crisis in 1947, we have to go into the reason why there was this crisis. That is one. The other is that even today, when it comes to international disputes, what do? You look for what you might call neutral parties. Now, today, even when it comes to Ukraine, Russia, India has inserted itself into that and the Americans and the Europeans have encouraged us to do that, because they feel we have good relations with Russia, we have got good relations with the US, we have taken a neutral position, and therefore we can play a role. So if you relate what is happening today, what was happening at that time, when actually the choice of neutral players was very limited, and India stood out very big and large and with a certain international profile, and Nehru's own international stature at that time, and India's neutrality. So they turned to India that India would be acceptable to both sides. And particularly when it came to Vietnam and Korea and all that, given now the fact that we had become independent, freed ourselves from colonialism, we were batting for anti-colonialism in the United Nations and everything, we had credibility with these countries. And we had also credibility with the West for several reasons, including our membership of the Commonwealth and our special relations with Britain or what have you. And I have a feeling that the British also encouraged this because they felt they could influence India's decision. They had some hold over India's decision making because they were all the time negotiating as friends. not as violent adversaries. So maybe they had this in this mind that if India can give in a role, it will help us to protect our interests because India would listen to us.
And these are some fantastic bits of information and explanation and clarity, which I'm sure everybody enjoyed, whoever listened. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Kallol, for your insights. And thanks again to Srikula Foundation. And obviously, thanks to all of those who patiently sat here and listened to this nice discussion. Thank you.